Mario is heading toward middle age at 35, so he's up there as well. But games are more than entertainment. They're also about culture. And play itself is even older than culture. But culture arrives with the arrival of sentient beings. So we can say that human beings, for sure, are able to play, and perhaps are able to play games. And there's been evidence that some primates have games as well that have some rule sets. But basically, as we didn't need to work so much, we got free time. And with that free time, we began to create culture. Painting, books, movies, well, that was much later, photography, also much later, and games. In games, we often think of them as child's play. But that's not true at all. In fact, games didn't start out to be something that could be played by children. Games were predominantly the play for adults. Here we see something from 1600 BC, which is a game. Parlor games were very common in the 1800s among adults.
This process of game
and games are also incredibly evocative.
As you could easily say, of course it's art. Practically anything can be art. Just look at the definition. The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, or works produced by such skill and imagination. So hell, even the picture you did of a horsey when you were 5 years old technically counts as art.
An extension of human creativity within a physical and/or shareable form, to put it as simply as possible. Some art is definitely considered better than others, but at the end of the day, art is art. Art critics like to take a more philosophical approach when it comes to interpreting what is good art, or what should even be considered.
As long as someone's having fun with it, you can't deny that they are valuable. I don't know about you, but I really do consider games a multifaceted art form. Stuff that has turned things into sport or creativity. And when we have rigid review scales and rigid ways on determining what is good or bad, it kind of overlooks a lot of what gives these games value.
So you can imagine in games you think about having fun all the time, but they're not about
And there it is, the age-old question, or relatively new question. Are video games art? Or rather, can they be considered a form of art? Even asking that question fills me with a sort of general angst. Like, how am I going to argue for this? Who even has research on this sort of thing? Does anyone even care about this? And why would they? It should hopefully be clear by now that I'm not exactly coming into this argument with scholarly levels of insight or decades of experience in gaming journalism, but given this opportunity to talk about something that I love, I will give it my best shot. Alright, so given that most of you watching are probably over the age of born, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that a majority of you are aware of the everlasting trend of video games. Yeah, all those Call of Duties and Super Marinero Bros and the like that populate television and computer screens worldwide. Those big newfangled digital McWhatsits that all the kids are going crazy over. So yeah, for anyone not living under an old shoe, it should be fairly obvious that video games, especially in the United States, are a big facet of our technological culture. The video game market in the US alone is expected to be valued at about $20.28 billion by 2020. Is that a lot of money? Like a billion of anything is like a lot, right? I don't friggin' know. But why does this matter? Well, it shows that we sort of already have a precedent. We already know how big video games really are in our modern day society. Games and the companies that make and present them have ingrained themselves in our modern times. While not everyone is a, dare I even say it, a gamer, I get the impression that many people are fully aware of their status in the world at large. I mean, it's not always great coverage. Ooh, but we're here to educate, not berate. So now we ask, how do people in the modern day see games as art? We've all heard the age-old term, art is subjective, and it should be a given that not everyone is going to agree on what is and isn't considered art. But in a medium like video games, one so revolved around the theme of interaction combined with entertainment, there exists a level of comprehension and understanding required to properly connect a game with a given audience. If you ask me, that sounds like a thought process a stereotypical artist is constantly going through, thinking about that connection out to the viewer, to the reader, to the the gamer. And I'm certainly not the only one who holds games in such a high regard. Journalism about video games has become integrated into the world of the press. Conventions and expos take entire weeks celebrating and promoting video games. And yes, I know, they are business practices which inherently come with a good deal of money, but even so, through these businesses, we get to see the product of developers and visionaries who are truly passionate about their craft and the people who play them. Well, most of the time. Even in the world of modern history, games have made their mark. In 2012, the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. ran an exhibition entitled The Art of Video Games, an expansive exhibit featuring over 80 different games which demonstrate the evolution of games as a medium. It also displayed multiple artist and developer interviews to contribute to the overall narrative of the exhibit. A quick blurb from the exhibit's webpage describes some context to the displays, stating that video games are a prevalent and increasingly expressive medium within modern society. In the 40 years since the introduction of the first home video game, the field has attracted exceptional artistic talent, an amalgam of traditional art forms, painting, writing, sculpture, music, storytelling, cinematography. Video games offer artists a previously unprecedented method of communicating with and engaging audiences. Oh, the kids in DC know how to summarize. Woo, woo-wee. Anyways, all this precedence I'm setting is not intended to validate my opinion that video games could be an art form. Rather, I'm just trying to set the stage for the rest of this video by showing that discussion for this topic thrives and exists, and boy does it. With any discussion of what you can call art criteria, there are going to be people who naturally disagree with that statement for one reason or another. The late movie critic Roger Ebert was an infamous figure in the gaming community for a statement he made in 2005, essentially saying that games cannot be comparable to the works of dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists, and composers. While Ebert would later amend these comments, citing a lack of experience with games, there are still some opposers in the form of actual game developers. In response to Ebert's initial comments, developer Hideo Kojima, who worked for Konami at the time, added that art is about capturing the heart of someone through whatever the artist radiates, calling games more of a service than an art form and comparing them to driving a car. For some reason. Hell, even indie developers have claimed that games aren't art. Yeah, probably the most artistic community of game development says they aren't. What a world. The founding members of game studio Tale of Tales, Michael Salmon and Arya Harvey, have gone on record to say that games are a waste of time. Salmon supported this stance, noting the systematic and rule-based nature of games. So yeah, people like to argue about games. A lot. Why does this matter at all? Well, maybe it doesn't. I can't force my views or stances onto you or expect you to adhere to them just because I'm forming a comprehensive argument. If anything, I want you, the viewers, to expand your mind, to consider what society says about certain activities like playing and making games, and how some people choose to live their lives doing so. All I'm saying is, there could be value in supporting artistic creativity in games, and I could talk about this for hours at least, but why don't I just show you? What, were you expecting something else? Yeah, I know. But it's Nintendo! They make the games for the kids with the snot hanging out of their nose! Reggie even said their games aren't about politics at all! How are these artistic games? What are you talking? Yo, we good? Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm aware that Nintendo of America's president, now former president, has stated that Nintendo games are about having fun and that politics are for other people. Whatever that means. But hear me out. Back to my earlier comparison of game developers and traditional artists, Nintendo has always been a company which strived to make games that were, well, fun. While you could argue that their recent milking of certain franchises is contradictory to that, I choose to think it aligns with what I said earlier about artists and interaction. That having to develop these projects with interactivity and communication while having an audience in mind is an artistic process. Is it pretentious to back up my argument with my own claim? Whatever. Back to Earthbound. So let's just get this out of the way. This game, it's weird. As in, it's real damn weird. Like, if the footage on screen doesn't illustrate it well enough, I don't know what will. You star as this young preteen boy named Ness. Ness has psychic powers, and, that's just sort of a thing he has. After a meteor crashes near his home, he meets a time-traveling alien named Buzz who has come back in time to prevent the horrible reign of Gygus, a being of pure, manifested evil. And he does so by beating up runaway dogs and crows, squaring off against local gangs and policemen, taking down a cult, getting swindled by prostitutes, exploring an ancient pyramid, all the while fending off ghosts, zombies, aliens, dinosaurs, street signs, taxis, whatever that is, and his childhood neighbor Pokey Minch. Whoa, that's raw. Yeah, this wacky weirdo game, released in 1994 and created by one Shigesato Itoi, is considered one of the strangest but best titles on the Super Nintendo, and its longevity is likely due in part to its bizarre sense of humor. I mean, it's most likely not remembered for its gameplay, which, when you break it down, is fairly basic. 4 party members, there's magic and physical attacks, and items and stuff, you know, an RPG. Yes, what people will eternally know this game for is its comedy and its overall tone, which you can see throughout the adventure. NPCs constantly poke at the fourth wall, enemies range from hilariously ordinary to extremely otherworldly, even minute characters have goofy, zany dialogue that contrasts with some of the dark overtones of the world. The entire world itself is based off an amalgamation of cultures, ranging from American to European to Asian, almost like each new area is some wacky continental caricature. That's not even going into the fictional races in this game, such as the hilarious Mr. Saturns, a race of small bulbous-nosed imp things that speak in a language so distinct that it alters the game's font. Or the Tenda, green humanoids that are so shy they can barely speak until they learn how to from a how-to book. How does anyone come up with this stuff? Now, I'm just guessing, but maybe our boy Shigesato Itoi wasn't exactly Earthbound himself, if you know what I'm saying. But some of you might be asking, why go through all these aesthetics? Other Japanese RPGs at the time all focused more on a major theme of fantasy. Final Fantasy often mixed themes of medieval warfare with mechanical technology. Fire Emblem told a more familiar story of lords and sorcerers engaging in grid-based combat. Shin Megami Tensei was famous for utilizing an enemy communication and recruit system in a post-apocalyptic Tokyo. Meanwhile, you have Earthbound. You play as a party of young children who all live in ordinary towns leading rather ordinary lives. I mean, Pooh's a prince, sure, but his home is very based on a modge-podge of traditional Asian cultures. Either way, it's clear none of these main characters fit the traditional prototype of RPG protagonist. That's not to say Earthbound's overall story is not one of fantasy. You assemble your group of 2 psychics, a scientist, and a royal martial artist to go around the world, fighting fantastical bosses who guard the 8 melodies Ness needs. Going back to that ordinary feeling that Earthbound revokes, with the main character being an average boy from a small town, I believe the game is set up this way to reflect the world from Ness's eyes. Despite the precedent that's set in Earthbound's story about going on this perilous journey where the world is falling apart as people are becoming corrupt and Gygas is overtaking the land, there's still this strange sense of innocence and whimsy as you go about it. As YouTuber Relax describes it, this game works the way it does because of a little thing we've probably all heard about in high school English class. Postmodernism. So, what is postmodernism? Well, for one thing, it's something that'll bore the hell out of your party guests as you incessantly try to prove to people how smart you are. No one cares that you read Vonnegut, Charlie! On the other hand, postmodernism is a rather broad term, referring to a massive philosophical movement which reached many artists of the 20th century. What did it do? Well, it caused many people to develop a skepticism of modern ideologies and cultural development, or our modernism. They began questioning what people already assumed about everything. Truth, reality, morality, human nature, social progress, anything really. So what does this postmodern theme have to do with a game like Earthbound? See, in this zany but near-apocalyptic world, it can be almost too easy to forget something rather important about all of our main characters. They're kids. Even while you're beating up aliens, mobsters, and otherworldly atrocities, you're doing it as an everyday young boy. You leave town, and your mother, sister, and dog. It's as though this whole trek represents a different kind of journey that's meant to be familiar to us. Growing up. This satirical world, along with showing us absurdities of all kinds, shows us the gross underbelly of the real world. In the first town Ness visits, he ends up having to take down a local gang leader, and after getting into trouble with the local police force, has to battle the whole squadron. That's, not legal. It's almost a direct parallel to the real-world problems of gang violence and police brutality. And hell, it hardly ends there. In just the next town over, Ness has to rescue one of the fated children, Paula, who was kidnapped by the local followers of Happy Happyism, a dangerous cult obsessed with painting everything blue. It's pretty obvious that these insane cultist enemies were at least inspired by the infamous Ku Klux Klan. These are the kind of ugly aspects of culture and society that you, an everyday child, would probably be living in blissful ignorance of. And that childlike innocence ends up being one of the major themes of Earthbound. Even among all the terror and wackiness the game throws at you, you're still reminded that before being heroes, these characters are kids. One of the most memorable things about the game is the ability to name your favorite food. At any time throughout your adventure, you can come home and your mother will make it for you, recovering your health and just being motherly. Ness's father, meanwhile, while never seen in-game, is always reachable by phone, recording your save data and putting money into your bank account each time you beat an enemy. The game's creator, Shigesato Itoi, purposely hid the father from the player, as his own father was absent for much of his life. This is also why the game is called Mother in Japan. These mechanics all tie into that theme of home and childhood, and all of this childhood innocence culminates with the final boss of the game, Gygas. It's become common knowledge that Gygas' conception is very inspired by a traumatic experience in Itoi's childhood. When Itoi walked into the wrong movie theater when he was younger and watched an adult film known as The Military Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty, he became horrified watching a lovemaking scene turn into a brutal murder, mistaking it as a rape. He described a dark, grim feeling witnessing this contrast of atrocity and eroticism, that loss of his childhood innocence condensing into Gygas' creation. In the end, it takes the prayers of all the characters Ness and his friends have allied with throughout the game, as well as you, the player, to finally defeat him. He disappears into nothing, still forcing out the same bone-chilling lines as he goes. Ness and crew return to the real world. Nothing's really different, but there's this feeling of renewal and a return to innocence. That's the special thing about this game. While mechanically it still feels like you're playing an RPG, the overarching themes and tone it presents sets it apart from other titles. And its influence is incredibly clear to this day, inspiring modern titles like Toby Fox's Undertale, Austin Jorgensen's Leads to the Painful, Kikiyama's Yume Nikki, and man, it even inspired the work of South Park creator Trey Parker, who took to the modern setting and child protagonists. And that's sort of what I aimed to say when making this video, to show that games can have this sort of artistic quality to them that, while they may never be held on the same plateau as films or novels, should still be shown credence and recognition. And in an era like this, where video games are such a lucrative business that they can become corporate, I can only find an appreciation of creators that still aim to create games that are artistic and above all, just fun. One thing that happened while I was making this video was the retirement of Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé. He was definitely a major part of my perception of modern video game industries, and seeing this one man who loved video games be so universally loved by his fans really made me take to Nintendo. Not just as a source of entertainment, but also as a company as a whole. My appreciation doesn't end there either. Looking at the late Satoru Iwata, Nintendo CEO in the face of Nintendo release broadcasts, who took a pay cut rather than lay off his employees, I began to see that even major corporations could be run by people of kindness and integrity. I still believe that for as bad of a rep as video games get in the modern day, there are honest and creative minds that man their creation. People in our modern era deserve to feel that their work is important, that it has the potential to inspire and bring joy to others. I definitely aim to bring that recognition to not just these popular titles, but to games in general, and I appreciate y'all for listening. Thank you.